Today's event is called Islamic Spirituality, the Search for Meaning. We haven't had a talk like this throughout the week, so hopefully this will shed light on a different aspect of Islam. Our speaker for tonight, this afternoon, not tonight. Our speaker for this afternoon is Abdullah Al-Andalusi, who is a Muslim thinker, speaker and researcher. He tours the UK, frequently giving talks on various topics. We're very honoured to have him come all the way down today to deliver this talk. And without further ado, Abdullah Al-Andalusi, please give his
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu. I greet you all the Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. It was a very interesting topic which I was asked to deliver about spirituality. And we've all heard and used the word spirituality quite a lot, many times in our lives. We generally use it to refer to actions that do not produce any particular material product or benefit, but are done seeking an intent, normally outside the material world. Many of us are used to dividing the material world and spirituality from each other. And therefore the material world is this world, and the spiritual world is usually attributed to some other transcendent world. But if we put our assumptions aside, we must ask, what do we know about the material world and about this other world? Of course, materialists would deny any other world except the material world, which they define as the universe of tangible and tactile objects. I say materialist and not atheist because someone can actually be an atheist and still believe in forms of spirituality. There are types of Buddhism which doesn't require you to believe in God. Those who are not materialists believe that there is a spiritual world that exists somehow outside the universe or parallel to it, that transcends it, where human souls can reach through attaining some developed spiritual rank or capability, or that can be attained only when the human being dies. However, I would argue that both the materialists and the spiritualists are wrong, at least according to the Islamic concept of spirituality. And allow me to explain. So let's take the material universe that materialists are so fond of. They say that only material things exist, only tangible things, only tactile things, things you can touch, feel, and smell. However, there are quite a lot of other things in this universe which are not material, which no one would contest their existence. For example, just observing the universe, we see that all these material objects behave towards each other with a set of regularities in their behavior. These irregularities we call laws, like the law of gravitation, laws of motion, laws of entropy, the laws of thermodynamics. Why are they called laws? It's because every time we see these objects of which these laws describe behave to each other, they behave in this very consistent manner, and so we call these things laws. Of course, this consistency or laws in itself are not material. So how these who or what determined the behavior of these objects, obviously is a discussion we'll come to. But their behavior, the regularity, isn't a material thing. And of course, science is all about investigating the laws, how objects behave towards each other. But I would argue that the biggest and most significant immaterial phenomenon is consciousness. The very thing that materialists use to experience the material world they love so exclusively. The mind, knowledge, feeling, emotions, concepts of justice, equality, maths, poetry, and art are not material things. Included in knowledge is meaning. Meaning is not a material thing and doesn't exist materially. Sure, you can write a book using language which encodes meaning. However, all the material universe can see is ink on a piece of paper wrapped up by some leather, nothing more. there's a clock in this, there's a clock up here. If you look at that clock, if a materialist or material universe, if it could ever look at things, was to look at that clock, all it would see is a device that moves and rotates twice per rotation of the sun, or rather rotation of the earth going about its axis. Nothing more. It is consciousness that gives that clock meaning, that gives those particular symbols a particular understood meaning. This also shows something very important, that something can be immaterial without being spiritual. No one says that their study of mathematics was a spiritual experience, unless you really, really love maths. But it's not, maths is not material. Maths just describes relations between things. In fact, actually, I would dare say that mathematics, certainly more than the empirical sciences, attains definite and certain knowledge. Its theorems cannot be refuted because mathematics is definite. 2 plus 2 equals 4. You don't have to observe that to know it is true. And it will always be true. However, in the empirical world, we only have theories about the material objects, how they operate, and many of those theories are proven wrong over time after we observe the universe using improved equipment and so on and so forth. So I would say mathematics is actually produces much more definite knowledge than science does, or rather observation of the universe. Because your observation, how do you know for certain that what you are describing is an accurate depiction of the reality of that thing? And if anyone doubts that, I'll just give an example. If any scientist here in the audience would like to define to me energy, I would be interested to know what the definition of energy actually is. What it is. What actually is energy? If you have a definition, please give it to me. But we talk about it all the time. The whole world around us is surrounded by energy. We use that word so ubiquitously, and yet what is the definition of the word energy? Let's say, oh, energy is something that makes something do. No. That's what it does. What is it? Right? Don't know. And yet they speak so confidently about the observation of the material world, and yet they can't describe the most fundamental and most ubiquitous aspect of it in energy. You, sir?
Define anything not in relation to the way it interacts with the world around it.
Well, I would say that if I say, what is a human being composed of? We can describe it. It's made of cells. So what is energy? What is energy composed of?
What is a cell?
Okay, and then we can describe, using a diagram, what the cell is, what it looks like, and so on. We can actually have a description of it's a membrane of some kind, and it has particular components in it. We can describe what it is. Yes, we can. That's the whole point. Like what is a house? No one says a house is only described by its capacity to give shelter. A house has a particular description. So that's what we have as a definition of a description of something, so what it is, and we describe separately what it does. These are two different things, not the same, one and the same thing.
I mean, most of the descriptions of the house you would give would be in relation to observations you make, not in relation to what the core essence of the house is. You don't define a house in terms of house stuff. Define it in terms of how it looks.
Okay, so what does energy look like?
Well, I mean, it depends
And
on
what
what
is
it's
it?
working in.
Well, look, with a house.
If you're talking about chemical.
Okay, just to continue. So with a house, we look at the house. We know it generally has. They must have some kind of a structure of some kind. It could vary depending on the type of house. Maybe you live in a hobbit house, or some people you live in a standard British Industrial Revolution era house. It doesn't make a difference, but you can describe what it looks like or what it is in essence. So you could say it's something composed of bricks, or something composed of some material matter which encloses a space. Right? You can make that description, but you don't just simply describe a house purely by what it does. However, I would even argue that even with energy, although we say that energy creates motion or creates movement amongst the smallest subatomic particles, but we don't know how it does that, and we don't even know fundamentally, as I said, what. Energy is really a concept we just created to describe some things that we see, but we don't actually see energy, and we don't actually know what energy actually is. It's actually a theory in of itself to describe motion. For example, people say kinetic energy changes to electrical energy, for example. And say, well, how does that look? Is there a particular energy corpuscle that changes from kinetic type to electrical type?
Well, when we
that's the situation. It is a theory to explain the material world. But my point
on the
is,
quantum level, we do talk about actual packets of energy. Yeah.
yeah, well, quanta of energy. But please tell me where you have seen in a microscope or electron microscope or any other way what an energy particle of some kind and what it is. And that's my point. Yeah, you can talk about it. Just using the word quantum doesn't actually mean that. Oh, now we've explained it. It actually makes it much more complex because now you're just moving it from one level to an even more smaller level, but we still don't know what it is.
Well, we have a series of observations that work and only work because of how we understand energy. I mean, it's rather.
No. You have a theory, or we have a theory rather, of what to explain what we observe in the natural world, but we don't know what it is. Right? So energy, as I said, is a theory introduced to explain what happens in the natural world, but we don't see energy and we don't know what it's made of. So that's simply my point. Anyway, just to continue the discussion. So, in terms of, that was the materialists. So materialism doesn't explain everything in the universe. And one also could argue that energy isn't material either. However, as for spiritualism, they also make a mistake, or spiritualists, they make a mistake. It is first to assume that they know anything about the realms outside the material world. Secondly, their claims about what transcends the universe is pure speculation without knowledge given to them or without a means to perceive it themselves. And unless you believe in a communication from the originator of the universe, where this originator reveals knowledge about such things, which people can call, let's say, revelation, to reveal, you cannot know for sure any of these things. Any so-called spiritual experience you might claim might be the subjective experience that you experience from your imagination, or it could even come from a drug-induced delirium. How can you be sure unless something is sent which can be experienced and verified by other people, some means of authentication? Now, as Muslims, we believe in the revelations of the Torah, the Injil, the New Testament Bible, as referred to by Christians, or parts of the New Testament Bible rather, the Quran, as well as many others that have come to humanity throughout humanity's existence, which we believe all were accompanied with authentications. However, we believe that these revelations conveyed knowledge of a world that is beyond the material universe, but these worlds are not spiritual ones, in the sense of disembodied spirits floating around in some intangible ether, which most human beings imagine as some kind of smoke or misty realm. No, the world which, as Muslims, we believe in, which is beyond the particular material universe, is also material. You can touch it, you can see it, you can taste it, smell it, and feel it when you're in those worlds. They exist, we believe, right now. The place of judgment in the hereafter, as well as paradise and hell, are all physical places according to the Islamic worldview, not spiritual ones. Sure, the laws of physics there may be a little different, but they are places that can be sensed physically according to Islam, Christianity, and various sects of Judaism. Who told you they wouldn't be so? In fact, they are not spiritual worlds made of non-physical substances, nor existing in different dimensions, whatever that means, but rather they are part of the same material reality of our universe. They just happen to be outside the particular bubble we live according to our worldview. They are physical places and a physical location inhabiting the same reality we do, and I think it's something you should dwell on for a moment. So if these other places are not spiritual, where lies spirituality? Well, spirituality lies in meaning. And meaning lies in purpose, and not any purpose, but rather the purpose of creation itself, or the purpose of everything that exists. And for something that doesn't have a purpose, it does not have a meaning. So I think the ultimate question is, does anything in this universe have a purpose? Does it have any meaning? And if it does, then what is this meaning? Now, first and foremost, I want to go to something really basic. What is purpose? And therefore, what is meaning? Well, the purpose behind something is always its intent. It can only be described as its intent. So the purpose of this clock is the intent that the clock was built for, which was to measure time. That's its purpose, and therefore you know its intent. So, knowing that, we know the meaning of it, and we know that those particular symbols have a meaning related to its purpose, which is they indicate the time of day. So, we have to ask the question, does the universe have a meaning? And does our lives have a meaning? And does anything that exists have a meaning? And the only way you can answer that is if you try to find out if it had a purpose. And the only way you can answer that is if you know if it was intended or not. You have to understand and study, or find out whether it was intended. You know, in language, I'll use that as an example, which is used for communication. The speaker invokes concepts within the mind of the listener. It is within this context that the use of words like, for example, cat, bucket, or car, have a purpose. The purpose of each word is to invoke a particular concept in your mind. This is the intended reason for the existence of these words. Therefore, these words have an intention behind their existence, and these words have a meaning. But if something could create itself, then it could define its own intention and therefore its own purpose. But because the act of creating oneself requires one to pre-exist first, to do so, it is rationally absurd. So the intention behind one's existence can only come from an external source, unless one has always pre-existed, and therefore you wouldn't have a purpose behind your existence. But since I'll take it that none of us here have pre-existed eternally, and we can know that rationally, which I'm going to go into, I would say that all of us here was made by something else. And the big question that everyone asks themselves, whether you are atheist or not atheist, is, why am I here? You can explain it through a bunch of material processes, or you can explain it through a bunch of material processes that was ultimately initiated by something that intended it, which is perhaps a theist perspective. But ultimately, we have to ask the first question, which is, how do we know anything actually even has a meaning or purpose in the first place? And to know that, we have to know what the universe was intended, and to know that, we have to know what created or caused the universe. Now, usually in such discussions, I always infamously bring a rock. And not to throw at people, but rather, I bring a rock and I ask the question, so I'm going to ask you to please imagine that this bottle is not a bottle and this is a rock. I should have asked the ISO before coming. Now, if I was to ask anyone here, if you saw a rock, well, there's actually rocks outside you can see. This one question is, how do you know any of these rocks that I saw outside coming here, or this, let's say, imaginary rock I have here, how do we know it was created? How do we know it had a start point? How do we know it wasn't an eternal, infinite object that was never created? Does anyone have any answers? How do you know that this is not an eternal rock? Well, I could say bottle, but I know what people are going to say. They say, oh, that's a watchmaker argument. We're using a human-created object, and you're saying, how do you know we know that human-created objects have been created by humans. However, I could counter that you might have seen bottles being created on TV in a factory. Most of you probably haven't gone to a bottle factory. Maybe some of you might have. But did you see this bottle, this particular bottle being created in a factory? Maybe this bottle is the eternal bottle of which all other bottles are based on. Humans discovered this bottle hundreds of thousands of years ago and said, this is a great concept. Let's imitate it and make every other bottle like in its image. How do we know that this particular bottle isn't infinite and eternal? You say.
Well, strictly we don't. It would be most sensible to assume it isn't, because we have layers of explanations that work best on the basis that, like every other bottle we've observed, comes from a bottle-making process. But we don't know beyond 100% certainty that it isn't eternal.
So you're not sure that this bottle is
I'm reasonably confident as a human.
You're reasonably confident, but you're not 100% sure this bottle couldn't be eternal.
No.
So there's a possibility. Are you saying there's a possibility this bottle is eternal?
There's a possibility in the same way there are possibilities.
So you're saying it's possible this bottle is eternal?
About,
infinite
yes,
bottle which created
that bottle.
and, or is eternal anyway.
Allow me to answer the question. Yes,
Yeah.
it's strictly possible that that bottle is eternal in the same way it's possible the world is flat, or that the sun is a mirage, or something like this. It's not logically impossible, but it doesn't seem likely based on what we know.
Well, firstly, there's often what do you define as likely. So you're saying that likelihood is just an assumption that because we've seen a whole bunch of other things in one way, that if we see the next iteration of that thing, it might follow what we've seen previously.
Yeah, if we have enough information.
Likelihood is just an assumption, but you're telling me you don't know for certain if this bottle is created or eternal.
You are strictly speaking from a philosophical perspective, no. But you're
No,
right,
not from a
we-
philosophical perspective, from a common sense perspective. From well, common sense sometimes isn't so common. From a rational perspective.
But no, but from a common sense perspective, I would probably assume you're British because of how you speak, right? But it's possible that you.
Maybe I'm very good at accents.
But this is the point, right? This is the point. Common sense isn't all that useful.
Well, I've just say common sense.
It's-
Just rationally, just using basic thought. How is it possible that we can know for certain whether this bottle was created or not? You're saying you can't know.
We can't know
Certain.
for absolute certain, but what we understand about the universe, everything we understand about bottle making processes means that the likelihood of it coming from the bottle making process is very, very, very high, so that we don't realistically consider the possibility that it's eternal.
I'd be
Which is
quite.
why it sounds absurd when you say that.
Yeah, it does sound awesome, doesn't it? It's strange that. What I would say regarding the bottle is I know for certain that the bottle or a rock that I see outside. Okay, this is why I prefer the rock rather than the bottle because there are rocks beyond our telescope range that exist all over this universe, presumably.
So there are rock-making processes that we understand, not that humans do very often.
There are rock-making processes for rocks we see on planet Earth. What about rocks that have fallen from the sky, fallen from space?
Well, we have obviously used science.
How do we know that they're not eternal rocks? These meteorites.
Like I said, strictly we don't. And when we find a rock that doesn't conform to our expectations based on the theories we have about the way the rocks form, we then are presented with issues and we have to say, well, this theory doesn't account for this. So we need to, start talking about other ways the rocks can form and look for new ideas.
Here's the point now. Why would we need to look, so if we see a rock that doesn't look like any rock that we know, or doesn't look like it was formed by any process we know, why do we assume it was formed by a different process of which we will now investigate what it is? Why do we assume that? Why don't we just say, oh, there's a rock that has formed under conditions that we're not used to. Hey, maybe it's an eternal rock. Why don't we assume that?
Well, we don't make any assumptions about what did happen.
Well, if you're saying that if we meet a rock that has formed using processes that no other rock seems to have formed under, or rather it looks different to any other rock we've seen, you said that the first thing we do is we try to find out we investigate the other processes that might possibly exist that create that rock, which comes with the presumption that the rock is created and not an eternal rock. Maybe this new, different kind of rock we encounter is a rock because it's new and different. Is different because it's an eternal rock. No one ever assumes that. No one reasonable would ever say that. Why is it? Because I will answer the point of how I know. Because quite simply, it is finite and limited. This bottle, I know it's not an eternal bottle. I'm going to help you out here with giving you some certainty.
That isn't, as a scientist, how you...
No, it's something that happens before. See, science is just observation. You look through a telescope or a microscope or a petri dish, or just directly with your eyes. Science, don't be confused by the term, it quite literally is just observation. Nothing more.
Recording of data.
Well,
And then...
Recording of data requires language. The assumption of causality requires philosophy, pre-existing concepts. The assumption that the universe follows a regularity of its laws requires philosophy, not science. Right? Science. See. Here's the thing, right? Science does assume things. If you study the philosophy of science, the belief that the universal laws are consistent across the universe is an assumption that science makes. But even that said, science, if you really want to break it down, science doesn't actually make any assumptions, it just observes. That's it. The making the theories part, that's human mind. Right? The writing the data into numbers, that's the human mind. That's not science. That's mathematics, that's language. if we make an experiment and we modify that experiment slightly and it produces a different result, and we record that, it's because we modified the experiment slightly, that possibly was a factor why it created a different result, is the understanding of causality, which is a rational process in the mind to understand causality, not science. Science doesn't make any assumptions, yes, but it doesn't do anything else except observe. Quite literally, change the word science to observation, and that's it. That's pretty much what it is. The idea that science is some kind of ideology or some kind of anything more than just observation are 21st century fallacies and myths, which we've kind of accrued onto it. And not to be confused with the scientific method, of which there's a method that was developed over time and is arguably still being developed to this day, refined and so on, to improve the accuracy of observation. But let me return back to my first point, and we can save it for the Q&A, because we're going to stall this lecture. Q&A, come back with your contentions. So, my point is that I know for certain this bottle is created, and I know for certain that every particular rock that I will see, no matter how weird and strange and different to any other rock I might have seen, I know that it is created is because it is finite and limited. And so, what I mean by that is, well, this particular bottle is not twice as big as what it is. It's not half as big as what it is. It's got kind of a black label with some blue coloration. It's not an orange label with green coloration, for example. It is its particular color. So the question is, what defined this bottle to be only this particular size with its particular attributes of color? What defined that? So let's go through the possibilities, right? The bottle defined itself. The bottle chose to be this size with this coloration on it. Problem with that is, in essence, what you're saying is the bottle created itself, and that produces a contradiction because the bottle would have to exist first in order to do anything. And if it doesn't exist, how can it create itself? The second possibility is that the bottle literally just popped into existence just the way it is, which is absurd. And the third possibility is that something else made the bottle and defined it with a particular size and shape and coloration. This works with bottles. This rational process works with rocks, because intuitively, even if you don't understand that process, every human being knows when it sees something limited or finite that it was created by something. It was defined by something intuitively. And this is the basis of all human thought on causality. Deny that, and you deny causality. You might as well throw causality out of the window. But there's no way you can deny it, because the only way you can deny it is by accepting an absurdity or a contradiction. The bottle made itself. Does that sound plausible? Or the bottle appeared from nothing. And before anyone mentions it, I know they're going to mention, there's a theory, and yes, this is a theory, as in a speculation, that there exists in a pure vacuum a kind of quantum foam or quantum sea, which all these different particles or quantum particles are hitting each other, and at some point they collide at some point and create matter. And people say, so that's what things can pop into existence. And I say, well, no, in that theory, you're actually saying the opposite. There is an existing quantum sea that exists, and then within that sea, there are certain collisions or certain things happen, which then cause observable matter to pop into existence. But you're not saying it's from nothing, though. That's still not from nothing. You see? So do not be fooled by a lot of what's called scientific theories. These are basically just speculations, including the concept of multiverse, which I'll get to in a bit. So, if we know that this object was created because it is a finite limited object, and we know a rock is created because it's a finite limited object, and we know that I am created because I'm a finite limited object, then we have to answer the question, ultimately, of all the finite limited objects that exist in the universe, what ultimately created all of them? Now, people might say, well, Abdullah, how do you know that the universe is an infinite, or the universe, how do you know it's a finite limited? Have you seen the entire universe? I say, well, you misunderstand. The universe the definition of the word really means everything that exists. That's pretty much what it means. The universe means everything that exists. So I'm not talking about the universe, which is the parts of everything that exists, which is infinite. I'm talking about only the finite parts of what exists. Ultimately, we have to explain where they came from. So, where did the finite part of the universe, let's just call it the universe for short, the universe, where did it come from? How is it made? Well, we don't know how. We have to hopefully investigate using certain materialist research processes, science, which I might add the Islamic civilization contributes to, like Ibn Haytham, that's a different discussion. We could be on the how process, but that we know the universe had an origin point or a beginning is absolutely certain because the universe is finite, it is limited, it has certain laws in it, and it has certain configuration. I don't know how big the universe is. I don't know all the laws of the universe. I don't need to. All I know is it's finite, limited. I don't need to know more than that because either it's limited or it's not limited. It's finite or it's not finite. There's no third option. So then, the finite universe, what creates it? There are only two possibilities. Just two possibilities. The first possibility is something else that was finite created the universe. Something else that was limited, like the universe, created the universe. Let's say, in one particular theory, the Big Bang and Big Crunch theory, which is basically that, the universe maybe came from Big Bang, but that was the result of a big crunch of a previous universe which kind of collapsed in on itself. And then it blew up again and became this universe. Maybe there was a prior universe, or maybe there was some other mechanism other than this universe which created this universe. Another finite limited mechanism. Maybe that's a possibility. Maybe that actually is a possibility. We don't know how big the universe is, and if that did exist, and there were other universes that made our universe, they too would actually be technically part of our universe too, because they are also in existence and they are finite and limited. But I digress. Some people say, well, how do we know there wasn't an infinite chain of pre-existing universes? So we had this universe was created by a previous dying universe, that was created by a previous dying universe, that was created by a previous dying universe, ad infinitum. Well, there's a rational problem with that argument. You would require an infinite chain of pre-existing universes, an infinite number of pre-existing universes, to be traversed before reaching this one. What do I mean by that is, in essence, it's like me saying that before this lecture began, the ISOC came out and said, Abdullah's arriving, he'll be arriving in an infinite amount of time, so just wait. If it takes an infinite amount of time for me to arrive in this lecture, would I ever arrive? An infinite amount of time, I would never arrive. And if I said that you could only leave this lecture after an infinite amount of time has passed, as riveting as though the lecture might be, you would be very despondent because that would mean that you would never leave the lecture. So if I had to tell you, or anyone told you, that for this universe to be come into existence required an infinite chain of other universes or other things, all creating each other, leading up to this point, we would never reach this universe. And ultimately, the question is never answered. Another analogy I like to use is, a domino rally. If you put one domino here and you put one behind it, you put one behind it, and you say that domino can't move until the domino behind it hits it. And if I was to create an infinite chain of dominoes, would any of them ever fall down? Or perhaps another analogy I like to use is, there might be like a sandwich dispensing machine in the university. There probably is. Usually in most universities there are. So say I wanted to get a sandwich and it cost, let's say, £1. But I didn't have any money. So I asked this sister here for £1. And she didn't have any money. And she asked her friend. And her friend didn't have any money. And she asked her friend. And she didn't have any money. So on and so forth. If an infinite amount of people were asked, all that didn't have any money, would I ever get that £1 for the sandwich? Would I? No. It has to begin with one person saying, oh yes, I have £1 to start the chain going with that £1 being lent to each person eventually reaching me. There has to be someone that starts that process going or give it to me directly, whichever process. So ultimately, we call this infinite regress fallacy for short in philosophy. So Infinite regress fallacy can't work, doesn't exist. You can't have an infinite chain of things. The only other possibility is that ultimately, whatever started this chain of creation going, or leading to us, or create us directly, whatever it is not finite, is not limited. Otherwise known as infinite, unlimited. The word infinis in Latin means not finite. And it's the same with unlimited. It has no limitations, has no particular defined characteristics that it couldn't change, or that was defined for itself. So it's not finite, not limited. Okay, it can only be that, there's no other possibility. But of course, someone could say, that's great, maybe we even concede that. But how do you know it isn't this infinite force you talk about, this infinite or unlimited thing? How do you know it has a will or it has intent? Because remember what I said in this lecture, for there to be meaning in this universe, meaning in human life, there has to be intent behind it, right? An intention behind our existence, behind everything in this universe. So maybe this infinite force or thing is a mindless force, a mindless thing. It just creates universes. There's a particular theory that fits that bill, which some people call it the multiverse theory. People get confused as to what that actually means. Some people think it means there's an infinite amount of universes, and other people believe it to be the thing that creates infinite amount of universes. So let's go with that latter description. So they believe the multiverse is almost like a mechanical kind of thing that creates universes. And the argument is that if you think this universe seems suited towards life, towards human life, it's only because there's an infinite amount of universes. And if you have an infinite amount of universes with infinite possibilities, eventually you're going to get one particular universe that will be suited for life and our condition. There goes the argument, right? But there's a little problem with that. Well, actually a big problem with that is, why does the multiverse make universes? Not answered. This multiverse, this mechanistic process, why is it making universes? No one asks that question. What I mean by that is, so this multiverse is producing universes. What is making it do it? There are two possibilities. One, something outside the multiverse is forcing it or pushing it to make universes. Like if you have an infinite factory assembly line, someone's pressing the button. And of course, if that was the case, then whatever's pressing that button is the ultimate cause, not the universe and everything that exists, not the multiverse, which would then mean the multiverse isn't the first cause. And then you'd have to answer, then what is making that multiverse? Is that first cause, and so on? So that can't work. The second possibility is the multiverse has an internal mechanism that makes it create universes. Like a clock has an internal mechanism that makes it move, right? Of course, we then have to ask the question, what is making that internal mechanism make universes? Or maybe there's a smaller mechanism inside that. Okay, great. And what's making that smaller mechanism make universes? Okay, maybe there's an even smaller mechanism inside that. Like, it's like a babushka doll. You open it up and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. There's a big problem with this. It's like answering that this clock works because there's a smaller clock inside that. And inside that smaller clock, there's an even smaller clock. And inside that, there's an even smaller clock. Ad infinitum. So an infinite amount of smaller and smaller clocks moving the hands on that face. There's a problem with that, if you've already noticed it. Infinite regress fallacy again. For the hands on that clock to move, you're saying it requires an infinite chain of clocks all moving each other to move that hand on that face of that clock. If that hand required and had to wait for an infinite amount of clocks to basically move each other, it wouldn't move. And what would be the first clock that moves all the other clocks? It wouldn't exist. So, infinite regress fallacy couldn't exist. The multiverse couldn't have an infinitely smaller mechanism inside it, because you're just now saying that's an infinite regress fallacy. And it couldn't be something else higher than the multiverse, making the multiverse do what it's doing, because then the multiverse isn't the first cause. It's this higher thing. So the only possibility is whether the multiverse doesn't make sense. The only possibility, just the only possibility, quite literally, the only other possibility is that whatever this infinite, all-powerful force is that created the universe or created all the universes, or however many there are, I don't know, it did it on its own initiation. It initiated it itself without any compulsion by any smaller mechanism or outside mechanism. We have a word for this, for something that initiates actions of its own, its own volition. It's called will. It has will. And if it has will, then when it makes the universe is intended. So this ultimate first cause, when it made us, we were intended to exist. And if there's an intention behind our existence, then our existence has a meaning. Because meaning is only defined as intention. That's what meaning is. So I can argue I don't need to empirically see this, only because it's quite literally the only possibility that doesn't run into contradictions and fallacies. There's no other possibility. And this is quite fascinating because the Quran, it tells the human reader to think about these things, to actually come to that conclusion. The Quran says, and we believe this is God speaking, and we did not create the heaven and the earth and that which is between them aimlessly. That is the assumption of those who disbelieve. And this is very fascinating. If you assume, in essence, if you're saying the universe has no meaning, even though the universe was intended to exist, this is your assumption. This is you making the assumption on that. And just a little anecdote, a side point I always find funny is I sometimes hear the arguments. They say, I don't believe in God, just like I don't believe in unicorns, fairies, and goblins. They always try to bring some fantastical creature, fairies, unicorns, fairies, and goblins. They'll say, okay. Then you ask them, what do you believe created the universe that has life in it? That was a universe that has life that could think and observe the universe and think about the origins of the universe and come to the conclusion of what we created. What do you think? How do you explain that? Let's say, I believe there's an infinite amount of universes that were created by the multiverse, which have infinite possibilities, and we just happen to be the one that was conducive for human life. I'll say, that's very fascinating. Because, taking your logic to its natural conclusion, if there's an infinite amount of universes with infinite possibilities, that must mean, I think that girl gets it, that must mean that in one of these universes, there's a unicorn. Another universe, there's a goblin. And another one universe, there must be a fairy. Infinite possibilities, right? And Lord of the Rings happened in one universe, and Game of Thrones happened in another universe. It must be infinite possibilities, right? Infinite possibilities. That's what they argue. Right? And I say, well, in response, looks like you actually believe in goblins, fairies, and unicorns, not me. Because according to their theory, they'd have to exist. And so that is just as a small anecdotal aside there. So reflect upon that, right? Reflect upon this. The creator of the heavens and the earth intended to create a universe that produced you. Your life, your particular life as well. Not just, okay, there's billions of other humans, yes, but you specifically as well. Your lifespan. Everything that happened to you today, including you coming here, was all intended to happen. Then your life has meaning. And if you're intended to exist, and that everything in the universe seems to operate on laws, like the law of gravitation, law of enthalpy, law of entropy, what is our law? What's the law for our creation? How are we meant to live? What should we be doing? And what shouldn't we be doing? Because we seem to have the capacity to intellectualize this. We have the capacity to make choices. Some disagree about whether free will exists. If you're a materialist, you have to disagree that free will exists. If you're a materialist, you have to believe free will doesn't exist. Now, of course, then you can't even justify why people should even have freedom. Because if free will doesn't exist, why give people freedom then? Whereas, at least we have the basis to argue that people have the right to make choices because you have free will, the capacity to make choices. And what is free will? How can you determine it in the material universe? But we have the basis to argue that. We have the basis to argue that there's free will. So whatever made us to have the capacity to observe the universe around us, think about it, and come to this very conclusion I'm presenting today. To come to knowledge of the Creator. The Creator made us, and with the capacity to have cognizance of His own existence. You don't even need revelation to tell you that. But the Quran does make these points. The Quran says, do they not think within themselves? God has created not the heavens and the earth, and all that is between them, except with truth, and for an appointed term. And indeed, many of mankind deny the meeting with their Lord. And in another verse of the Quran, indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternation of night and day, are signs for those of understanding. The word signs in Arabic is ayat. I'll come back to that in a second. Who remember God while standing or sitting, or lying on their sides, and give thought to the creation of the heavens and the earth, saying, Our Lord, you did not create this aimlessly, exalted are you above such a thing. And this is the meaning that comes to our lives. Because if you were intended to exist, and you were intended to live by a certain law, like everything in the universe follows regularities, then what is the law behind our existence? And then you have the basis to judge good and bad. Why? Because you know the intent. Obviously, we are very complex creatures, and we weren't born with instruction manuals. We require some help as to how to actually order mankind, which I would say is the argument for the necessity of revelation, because we're too complex. How are we meant to organize an economic system that produces real justice? How are we meant to organize a system that produces accountable government? True accountable government. How do we organize ourselves to create justice in the world, to give to those who need and those who deserve, and not to those who don't deserve? So these are things which political philosophers are still trying to wrangle to this day. We still don't know how to do these things. But, and very fascinatingly, if you know your purpose and you know how to live, you can judge good and bad. We know what a car is for. Generally speaking, a car is for transport, unless you buy one for demolition derby. But generally speaking, it's for transportation. So if a car's engine doesn't work and the car doesn't move, is it a good car or a bad car? Anyone? It's a bad car. Why is it a bad car?
Because it doesn't fulfill its purpose.
Exactly. Fulfilling your purpose is what determines good and bad. What other basis is there? I mean, even as Richard Dawkins said that, because he rejects this idea of obviously purpose by the universe, he says that it doesn't exist. Good and bad doesn't really actually exist in reality. You could argue, as an atheist, he'd say it's a fiction that we produce. It isn't actually good. There is no good, there is no bad. But because we have meaning, we have guidance, we can argue, arguably from our perspective, that there is good and bad in the universe based on whether you fulfill your purpose. And the fascinating thing is that all aspect of human life. So the thing is this: if God intended you to exist, and He made you to have a lifespan, and He made you to need to find food and to have family and to relate to other human beings, all these things that you're going to do in your life, these were intended. Everything about that, what you do, is intended. Surely your purpose in life isn't just once a week. You know, people say, yeah, I go to church once a week, and that's my fulfillment. Say, wait a second, is your purpose of life only once a week, or is it part-time purpose of life? If you have a purpose of life, wouldn't it not affect every aspect of it, inform every aspect of your life, encompass every aspect of your life? And this is what the Quran says. It says, it tells the reader to say, verily, my prayers, my sacrifice, my living and my dying are for God, the Lord of all that exists. Your entire life is encapsulated by your purpose. And this is spirituality. See, spirituality isn't that you float off as some disembodied spirit throughout the ether. That's not spirituality. Spirituality isn't just only going into some underneath a Bodhi tree and reflecting on things. I mean, yeah, it's good to reflect. No, nothing wrong with that. But that is not the be-all and end-all of spirituality. Because we were created to eat. So while someone is reflecting off in their underneath a Bodhi tree or in a cave somewhere, there are people that have to actually till the land and produce fruits and vegetables so that humans can actually eat and feed the person who is focused on his particular matter or her matter. And here's the fascinating thing. If good and bad informs every action you do, and you are created to live in this life, then spirituality is everything that you do in your life. If you do it pursuing the good, fulfilling your purpose, having in mind your creator, that is spirituality. So being a good employee, that is spirituality. Being a good student, that is spirituality. Excelling in your field of study, that is spirituality. Being a good friend or a good confidant to somebody, that is spirituality. Inventing a medicine that cures some forms of cancer, that is spirituality. As well as prayers, as well as reflection as well. All these aspects are spirituality. There is no division really between the material world and the spiritual world, because if you really reflect on it, as from a atheist perspective, the entire universe was created by God or by the Creator. So the entire universe is spirituality, if you want to look at it from that perspective. Everything is spirituality. So this division that we've created, the artificial one, meaning in a secular world, that there's the material world and the spirituality is a fiction. There is no division because everything is your purpose in life. And I know politics these days say we should keep, let's say, religion or ideology separate from politics, which they don't do it. Like, you tell a secular liberal to keep secular liberalism away from politics. They say, what? But it informs our politics. Well, so does our way of life does. So why are you telling us to do it as well? We'll tell a communist, it's great you're a communist, but keep it for your private life, not for the political life. So wait a second, but communism is all about political, life and systems. And the same with a Christian, the same with a Jew as well. They had certain beliefs and ideas that informed their political life. So to say, and really what you're saying with the idea of secularism is, you're saying that whatever is your purpose in life, it should be separate from your life's affairs, which is completely irrational as a concept. So spirituality, brothers and sisters and friends, is not detached from the material world. As Muslims, we don't seek spirituality away from the material world. We seek spirituality through the material world. Because ultimately, all these things come from the same origin. We believe the Creator. Thank you for listening.